Hello, I'm John Allure. Before you listen to this episode, a couple of things. These are podcasts from the first season of Who Killed Theresa. They haven't been heard in over 4 years. They're raw. It took me a while to develop a style. A lot of people like them that way, unvarnished. Others commented that it was amateurish. Nonetheless, here they are, unedited. I haven't gone back and listened to them. I haven't cleaned them up. Thanks for listening, and once again, life isn't fair, justice is blind and dysfunctional, and some cops aren't smart and dedicated like on television. This is Who Killed Theresa. This is Who Killed Theresa, and I'm your host, John Allure. We need to talk about the Sharon Pryor case. We need to talk about the Sharon Pryor case. I think you're going to want to listen to this episode all the way through. When we conclude, I'm going to talk about some specific, some information that if you've been following all of these things all these years, you could have put together yourself. But I think when you look at this stuff so often, obvious things escape you. But I think you're going to want to hear the end of this. There's something new geographically that I'm going to reveal that I think you'll find very, very interesting. But before we get to that, I kind of want to give my spiel about what this is all about. We discuss a series of cold cases in the Quebec region of Montreal and the eastern townships from approximately 1975 to 1981. The distance between Montreal and Sherbrooke, Quebec is about 100 miles. And in this podcast, the related or possibly related cases, some of the related cases that we will specifically focus on are the cases of Sharon Pryor, Lise Choquette, Louise Cameron, Jocelyn Houle, Chantal Tremblay, Joanne Dorion, Hélène Monast, Catherine Hawkes, Denise Bazinet, Manon Dubé, Lison Blais, Teresa Allure, Nicole Gaudreau, Tammy Leakey, and two unidentified bodies of young women. Now, the Sharon Pryor case, this is an early case. It's from 1975. And of the cases we've discussed so far, unlike the cases we've discussed so far, this one has gotten a lot of exposure, chiefly because the family, the Pryor family, has been so engaged in the matter of Sharon's murder. So when I say that, so the cases we've already discussed: Manon Dubé, Louise Cameron, Teresa Allure, Hélène Monast, Lison Blais, Denise Bazinet. For instance, if you Google any of those names right now, your search engine will probably turn up first a link that will lead you back to my website, Who Killed Theresa. It's because I'm the first one who ever discussed those cases. That's not so with Sharon Pryor. Google Sharon Pryor. The Sharon Pryor website will come up, which their family started. And I'm saying this, for me, the importance of this is I am by no means an expert on the Sharon Pryor case. There are other people who know it better. There are other people who know more about it than I do. There's all kinds of attention on Sharon's case. So what I say is my version of it, but if you want to dig deep, you can find all kinds of information. I could probably devote 2, if not 3 episodes on this matter. Eventually, I will invite Sharon's sister, Maureen and Doreen, and their mother, Yvonne, on the show for an interview. But for now, what I'd like to give you is kind of the bare bones details of of what happened to Sharon. Sharon was from Montreal, and the family lived in a neighborhood called Point St. Charles, which is just at kind of the more eastern side of Montreal. It's just adjacent to the St. Lawrence River. You cross the Victoria Bridge, and you're on your way to the eastern townships to Sherbrooke. So it's right on the edge. Montreal case, body found across the Victoria Bridge in the suburb of Longueuil. So Sharon disappeared on Saturday evening, March 29th, 1975. She had been at her home at 445 Congregation Street in Point St. Charles with friends and family when she decided to go out to meet friends, including her boyfriend. And she was headed to a local pizza parlor, which was just a few blocks away. She left her house around 7:30 p.m. that Saturday evening. And of note, she leaves behind her bus pass and her money, which may be of significance later. And she declines the offer of a friend to accompany her there. So her destination is five blocks away. It's a pizza parlor called Marina's Pizza, which is at 2050 Wellington Street. And that's at the corner of Avenue Ash. And she never makes it to her destination. She leaves at 7:30. She does not show up to meet her friends. So during the initial phase of the disappearance of Sharon, because she disappeared from Point St. Charles, the case falls under the jurisdiction of the Montreal police, called the MUC police. But when the body is found off the island of Montreal in Longueuil, the case quickly will transfer to the Longueuil police. And to the best of my knowledge, the Quebec, Sûreté de Quebec, the provincial police were never involved in this case, although who knows. But again, so now we have another case with cross-jurisdictional blurred lines. And now of the cases we've discussed, we have three forces. The majority of them are Sûreté de Quebec, provincial police. But if you recall Lison Blais, the woman who was strangled in the east end of Montreal, that's a Montreal case. And now we have the Longueuil police force being involved in a case when Sharon's body is found. So let's move to the discovery of Sharon Pryor. So Pryor's body was found just 3 days later on April 1st, 1975. And she was found in a field at Chemin du Lac and Guillemont Boulevard in Longueuil. She's found by a fellow named Jacques Bertrand, who is a beekeeper. Bertrand kept bees on this property in an industrial area of Longueuil. It's industrial now. I'm not quite sure what it was like back then. I think it was still industrial, but you still had fields and things. And anyway, Bertrand was told that he should go to the property and check the lock on the gate because someone had observed that the lock on the gate that would have led to the apiary was open. So obviously he goes, he finds a body, police are called in. Now Pryor had been, I say badly beaten, severely beaten. She had choke marks on her neck. She had choked on her own blood. Her nose was broken. And the assailant had crushed Sharon's chest with her knee. And I apologize if it's graphic, but this is marked, I think, on SoundCloud as adult content. You need to know it. You need to know some of these things. Pryor was dressed in her suede coat. She had her sweater on, shoes, and socks. Her pants were about 6 feet away from the body. Her underwear was hanging from a tree. A branch was clutched in her hand. There was blood and branches in her hair. So, very, very disorganized crime scene. A man's shirt was found at the scene, and detectives concluded that this was probably used to bind her. And a receipt was found at the scene with Sharon's name on it, so that's how they knew immediately that this was Sharon Pryor, probably Sharon Pryor. There was a tire mark observed along with the footprint of a man thought to have weighed about 200 pounds. And it was concluded that the loose items that were thrown around were probably thrown from the window of a vehicle, so very abruptly, possibly a vehicle leaving the scene. So the autopsy is performed by Jean Hould. Two Longueuil police detectives are present at the autopsy, and among many things, the autopsy concludes, number one, that Sharon had been raped. There was spermatozoa found in her vagina. The blows to her head were most likely caused by a pointed instrument, possibly a ring on a finger. There was partially chewed tape found in her hair, which probably meant that Sharon was gagged. And they also concluded, although I'm not quite sure, that Sharon most likely died that Tuesday afternoon that she was found, which would mean that she was probably held captive from Saturday evening through the Tuesday morning. Now, a few other factors to talk a little bit about. About a half hour before Sharon left her home on March 29th, 1975, a 23-year-old woman named Cheryl Rao was attacked in Point St. Charles by a man wielding a knife. And this suspect has later eventually become to be known as Mustache Man, white, English, 6 feet tall, about 200 pounds with a mustache. And that incident occurred on Wellington Street. So within the corridors that Sharon would have been traveling. And that's the same, and also that's the same street where Marina's Pizza was on. And I bring this up because this eventually led to nothing, but you might as well know about it because it figures prominently in a lot of the writings on Sharon's case. So in 2004, police received a tip that Sharon may have been held captive at a garage space at 2107 Rue Favard, 1 block south of Marina's Pizza. Police tested the site for DNA, but results were inconclusive. Sharon's blood was not identified. And the mother of Sharon, Yvonne Pryor, stated on April 3rd, 2016, that this all proved to be a bogus, in her words, a bogus tip. Now, hindering the ability to look at possible DNA pieces of evidence and all of this is that all of the evidence in Sharon Pryor's case was destroyed by the Longueuil police. And this has been confirmed to the family of Sharon Pryor. In fact, I visited Yvonne Pryor, their mother, I guess about 8 years ago, at her home in Point Saint Charles, and she showed me the letter that the Longueuil police had written to her, saying that they had lost her evidence. What's frustrating about that is, did they lose it or did they not? Years after that event, Sharon's coat was found among, in their sort of long gay evidence repository. Someone found it and it looked familiar, so they kind of contacted the Pryors and said, "Hey, do you recognize this? Is this meaning anything to you?" And it's like, "Yeah, it's Sharon's suede coat," which leads you to you must ask yourself, if something was lost in such a haphazard fashion and then found in such a haphazard fashion, what else haven't they found? What else hasn't any of these police agencies found? If they say the underwear that my sister was found in was destroyed, or in the case of the Catherine Hawks case, which we'll get to, if they tell you that evidence was destroyed, anecdotally, how sure are they? How confident can we be, or is it just misplaced? Is there evidence that just is sitting somewhere that nobody has found? Again, very, very, very frustrating, these matters. Now, if you go to the area where on my website where I wrote about the prior case, there's a lot of other stuff that I have written down there, but a lot of it is related to a narrative I was investigating at that time with the full moon murderers and the young man who was arrested in that matter. That is one narrative, but that's not the narrative I want to discuss now, because I don't think it's the most likely thing. Frankly, at the time that I wrote that, I was trying to stir up controversy and interest. So again, I brought it up as a possible, probable, but really the relation to Sharon Pryor and the Chateauguay murders from that period, possible, not probable, in my opinion. But what I do want to do is talk about Sharon in this context. So a couple of things to note here. 1975. So one of the earliest of these cases, it predates the 77 and 78 cases that we primarily talked about so far by a couple of years. It also, in my opinion, Sharon's case is a real puzzle. It's what I'm going to identify as a nexus case. Recall that we talked about the forest location south of Magog as a nexus location where there seems to be a convergence of potential evidence and cases. Much like that, Pryor is a nexus in that it depends on how you frame it. She could be related to the cases we've already talked about, although she could also pivot and have nothing to do with those cases and related to another series of cases that we'll get to. It sort of depends on which of the pieces of evidence you focus on. It certainly means they can't all be right. I don't think that all 20 to 30 cases are connected. I don't think one serial killer preying on all of them. I think it's a variety of serial offenders potentially copycatting each other's or committing these crimes because they're seeing that people are getting away with murder, so why shouldn't they? But because of that, most obviously, in the prior case, if you it's they're not all right. So there's potential for bias here. Some of the clues lead one way, some of the clues lead the other way, and one or the other, one is right and the other is being led down a garden path, and we don't even know it. Some other things to note, and we brought this up before. I want to talk a little bit about Point Saint Charles in the 70s. This neighborhood that Sharon grew up and lived in. Point Saint Charles, or it was called at the time, the Point, was a rough neighborhood. It was ghettoized in this industrial area and is virtually surrounded by the railroad yards and container offloading areas where all these containers are stacked and that. So it was a physical ghetto, incredible poverty in that area, incredible, and with poverty you get alcoholism and drug abuse and violence. I will post on my website a documentary by the National Film Board of Canada called The Point, which was made at this time, which kind of talked about the damaging poverty in that area. It's a fascinating time capsule of Point Saint Charles in that era. A really great thing to watch, and it kind of gives you an instant window into the lives that these people were going through at that time. So with poverty and abuse, substance abuse, come gangs. It's pretty well known that the street just north of where Sharon lived, Sharon lives on Congregation. The street north of that is Sebastopol. That's the last street in that area. Beyond that is the Frontier, the rail yards. The Satan's Choice biker gang, which is a sort of predecessor of the Hells Angels. They I think they got patched in with the Hells Angels. Had like a bunker house or at least a home there. So they were a block away from that area, and biker lore has it, and before I say this, there are so many people who know more about Quebec biker culture than me. I know a little. I don't. It's not my oeuvre. It's not my area of expertise. But I do know this. One of the rumors was that there's a member of Satan's Choice, and his name was Mike French, and he may possibly have been on that Sebastopol street, living in that bunker at that time. It is wildly rumored that Mike French was eventually he was murdered in November 1982, supposedly because he had bragged about having raped and murdered Sharon Pryor in 1975. So that may or may not be true. We don't know. But he's clearly what we do know is the Satan's Choice biker gang was in the environment. They were a block away in Point Saint Charles, and that's simply something to just parking lot that information for right now. I don't want to make too much of a big deal of it, but we will eventually discuss that. So I've talked about this before, about how when you make a public records request on a lot of these cases, you will get medical legal records, and then you'll get a few surprises. And that's certainly the case with Sharon Pryor. So in addition to the autopsy report, what was included was several police reports from the Longueuil Police Department. And so they tell us some things. The official cause of death is this asphyxiation by bronchoaspiration of blood, meaning Sharon eventually, despite multiple things that could have killed her, she eventually choked on her own blood, and that's what they determined had killed her. As well in here is detailed listings of everyone that they initially interviewed in the matter. Certainly, family members, but also getting into suspects. The boyfriend was suspected at one, initially. The police officers involved in the matter, et cetera, et cetera. I won't bore you with it. It's all on the website, but it is in here. And the lead detectives were Pierre Robideau, sergeant detective with the Longueuil Police, René Lancombe, also with the Longueuil Police. And then much detail about the exhibits at the scene of the crime are interesting. The jeans, bra, coat, sweater, I believe driver's license. I'm translating him from the French to English. A bracelet with the inscription "Love" on it, or earrings, a Timex watch. I think that's the third time we've heard a Timex watch. Everyone had a Timex watch at that time. I won't make too much of that, et cetera, et cetera. And then just kind of recapping the similarities and dissimilarities of the cases we've talked about so far. So asphyxiation with Sharon, but again, a brutal beating, the most brutal beating that we've encountered so far in these matters. The only one close to it is the Lison Blais case, where Lison was she died of strangulation, but she had been beat about the head. We don't see that in Theresa Laure. We don't see that in Louise Camera. Certainly, Camera brutalized around the vaginal area, but no beating about the head or body. No evidence of that in the Bazinet case. Although much in the Bazinet case is there's an air of mystery to it that we're not sure about. And then I do want to address the matter of false leads. Over the years, with all of these cases, I've heard a lot of disinformation about things. One of the things I heard in the Sharon Pryor case that came up is years later, almost, I think 30 to 40 years later, someone came forward and said they saw Sharon on a bus that night headed out of Point St. Charles. And I doubt that for two reasons. One is it clearly is documented that Sharon did not have money and she did not have her driver's license with her. So that's improbable. The second thing is people remembering things 30 years later is suspect and dangerous. And I don't think anyone ever remembers something with malice or malintent. I think just the opposite. People feel bad and they want to help. And so in their desire to help, this bias comes in. I imagine the first thing is that person could have been Sharon Pryor. And then over the years with memory, you can convince yourself that that person was Sharon Pryor. A similar thing happened with the Louise Cameron case. Someone came forward decades later and said, no, wait, Louise was actually out clubbing that night and at a discotheque and drinking, etc. Well, no, why was that never brought up initially? There's nothing to that effect in the initial documented evidence that she was out. In fact, all indications say that she was on King Street, which is again Highway 112, in a dépanneur, buying milk or etc. And then she traveled a block and a half along King Street, Highway 110, back to her apartment, and somewhere within that time she disappeared. And then, but again, I think people want to help, so they remember false information. And lastly, I'll bring up in the matter of my sister. Initially, I think in the first episode, I read a report from private investigator Roch Goudreau. It's well known that the weekend before Theresa disappeared, she was hiking at Mount Orford, which is actually along Highway 112. Just it buttresses Highway 112, and she went for a hike with students from Champlain College. Years later, a woman came forward, convinced that her brothers had killed Theresa. Um, all kinds of information brought forward. It was very spooky. But her chief piece of information was that she saw Theresa on Mount Orford the week before she died in the company of her brothers, and that they were on the mountain and together in a group, so like they were friendly with each other. Now, when pressed on this information, the woman's story got changed. It was then that Theresa was skiing on the mountain with her brothers. Now, we've not heard anything about skiing before. We heard hiking. And then, of course, lastly, what skiing implies is snow. Uh, it is a fact that the week before November 3rd, 1978, late October 1978, there was no snow on Mount Orford. There just wasn't. There's no snow in the region whatsoever. In fact, the day that Theresa disappeared was a beautiful sunny day, unusually sunny. That's what led her to not wear a jacket. She was wearing a sweater. So there's no way that this memory is in any way grounded in fact. This is a false memory. Again, I don't think this woman wanted to mislead anyone. She merely wanted to help, and thought by providing additional details and facts that this would lead to helping an investigation. And it happens all the time. So I want to turn now here in the second half back to the historical highway between Sherbrooke and Montreal at that time, Highway 112. And we've talked about this a lot. So before we talk about it in terms of these cases, I want to talk about my own personal history with Highway 112. Because for a guy who has not lived in Quebec in over 30 years, over almost, we're pushing on 40 years, my association with Highway 112, just on a personal level, is kind of fascinating. I have touched it several times in my life. So beginning in Sherbrooke, Highway 112 is, as we've said, is King Street. It's one of the main drags that cuts through the city. I have stayed at Auberge de Gouverneur, the hotel that is right along Highway 112. I have visited the headquarters of the Sûreté de Québec in Sherbrooke, which is right across the street from the Auberge, which is on Highway 112. I have had dinner in restaurants along King Street with Champlain College administrators and with Sue Sutherland and friends of Theresa's from that era. Again, Highway 112. I have gone grocery shopping with Senator Pierre Boisvenu, who is, as you know, a victim's advocate, along Highway 112. We went and bought scallops and salmon there before we had dinner. If you continue on Highway 112 into Magog, I held a press conference with Pierre Boisvenu and Sue Sutherland in a restaurant, in the back garden of the restaurant, and that was Highway 112. The main drag that cuts through Magog is Highway 112. I had lunch on Highway 112 in Magog last summer. I met a former Sûreté de Québec investigator in a coffee shop on Highway 112 last summer. Mount Orford, where Theresa, as we say, was hiking, is along Highway 112. So there's lots of things that touch this road. It's just often, because it's a former highway, you're not aware of its significance. I wasn't really aware that Highway 112 went right through Magog until I just related to you all the points that I've touched along the way with it. So as I say, before the Highway 10 was constructed, this was the artery that would take you back and forth between Sherbrooke in the eastern townships and Montreal, further west, 100-mile distance. So let's recap Highway 112 in terms of the cases. So we've already just said it. Louise Cameron disappears off Highway 112 at the between the dépanneur corner store and her apartment. The location of the evidence, the body of Louise Cameron, the purse that may belong to Lison Blais, and the clothing that may have been there belonging to Theresa Allure, and several other articles of women's clothing is found just south of Highway 112 in the Magog area, which we just talked about. The body of Denise Bazinet is found just south of Highway 112 in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. The murder of Helen Monast occurs along Highway 112 in Chambly. The body of Sharon Pryor is found in an industrial area just north of Highway 112 in Longueuil. But then the final thing. Where is Highway 112 in relation to where Sharon Pryor disappeared? It turns out the fastest way out of Pointe Saint Charles is Highway 112. If you want to get out of there, you could go south, but if you go south, you cross a number of streets. You are putting yourself in great risk of being seen. But if you go north, again, you have all those rail lines. You're in relative seclusion. And let me walk you through how it is. So, Sharon is en route Congregation, and she's headed west towards Wellington. Well, if you're at the corner of Wellington and Congregation, you need only drive up the street approximately a half mile, and you're on Highway 112. You take a right, you head east, you cross the Victoria Bridge, and you are on your way. And again, there's no other way out of... You'd have to look at a map, but trust me, there's no other way out of Pointe Saint Charles because you are completely buttressed by rail yards. There's no route to lead you out of there. As well, we talked about Chemin Sebastopol. Sebastopol, although it runs parallel with Congregation, it does not intersect with Wellington. In fact, if you're traveling west on Sebastopol, you have to hang a right and you are forced to intersect with congregation. And then you can take congregation to Wellington. And I think I've referred to this. I've walked this area, um, I think last spring, because I had never been here. So I went and I wanted to see it. And that frontier area along Sebastopol is creepy now. Uh, an old rail yards with rail containers and all that. The houses are not in great shape. I can't imagine what they looked like back then, but I mean, I'll give it credit. The point is obviously it's definitely come back. It's come a long way, but even today it is an intimidating place. So here's some things that I'm going to submit to you. Just how close is Highway 112 to some of these places? Well, Highway 112 to Chemin du Val, that's the wooded area where Camara's body and Theresa Lorth's clothes might have been seen and the purse was found. It's 3 miles. It's 3 miles from that wooded area to Highway 112. The distance from Rue Congregation and Wellington, where Pryor was headed, the distance from that corner to Highway 112 is 650 meters. It's less than half a mile. The distance from Highway 112 to where Helen Monast's body was found, it's 250 meters. It's less than 2/10 of a mile. And in fact, I drove on it and I wasn't even aware I was driving on it. The side street that is adjacent to the park where Helen was found, you head up barely half a block and you are on Highway 112. And then finally, where Camara disappeared is Highway 112. That's how close these points in these murders are to that route, which was the main route in the late 1970s for traversing that Quebec region. If you wanted to make a quick escape after killing Helen Monast, quick, can't even describe it. 250 meters. If you needed to get out of Point Saint Charles, yes, you could go south, but it's a bit more of a convoluted path to get out of Montreal. The expeditious way is to drive half a mile up the street, and you are on your way. You are out of Point Saint Charles. Now, we talked about this a little last time. You know, the last time I checked in with the Helen Monast case, you know, as we've said, it's on the Sûreté de Québec's cold case site. It's gotten some attention, but it's not getting any movement. That was the first case on the cold case site, and I think it's been there for close to 10 years, 5 to 10 years. And still nothing new. It was because they're looking in the wrong place. You know, the Sûreté de Québec made a huge deal. They all showed up one Saturday, you know, in the town circle or wherever in Chambly. You know, they set up a tent for the 30 or 40,000 locals to come forward, and if they remembered anything, to give the information to the police detectives. They didn't get anything. And they didn't get anything because whoever did that was murdered Helen and was on their way out of town within 2/10 of a mile. They were gone. So you're not going to find anything by looking inward there at all. Um, Recently, I think the Montreal Gazette wrote a story, or it was either Helen's sister who told me that they were very intent on getting the. They asked me, did I have photos of Helen's funeral, so that they could comb the funeral photos and see if they could see anybody lurking in the background who might have done this. Look, the guy who did this didn't come back to the funeral because he was gone. He was out of town. He was long gone. And the same can be said with Sharon Pryor. There's been a lot of effort to over the years to drum up. Let's talk to people in the point. See what they might have remembered. Whoever did this wasn't there long enough to hang around, man. Crime of opportunity at the corner of a congregation in Wellington, and bam, within half a mile on 112 out of town. Sûreté de Quebec is looking in the wrong place, and they're looking in the wrong manner because they simply don't understand the importance of geography in these matters. They refuse to entertain the notion that Helen Monast is related to anything. They're looking at it in complete isolation. They refuse to entertain the idea that approximately 10 to 20 miles just south, you have the body of Denise Bazinet, found within a month of Helen Monast, but they contend there's absolutely no way. We know, they say, that these cases aren't connected. Well, if you know, tell us why you know. Or at least tell the families why you don't know. Because I can tell you that the brother of Denise Bazinet, Georges Bazinet, is operating to this day completely in the dark. And their family was operated in the dark for decades. He said it on French television. He said it to me. They knew absolutely nothing. The police have been entirely unforthcoming about any information. They won't tell them anything. Why is it so outrageous to look at these unsolved murders as a collection? Why is that a matter of fantasy? What else do you have to lose? What else do you have to go on? There is nothing to go on. Somebody's not going to suddenly remember something because all they're remembering is false memory at this point. No one's going to confess anything. Why would you? You got away with it for decades. So you're going to come forward now and you're going to clear your conscience. And I don't really want to hear this fantasy that on your deathbed you want to make amends with God. That's great for movies, but that doesn't happen in real life. It's nonsense. So what else do you have? What other opportunity do you have other than to look at these matters tout ensemble, all together, and see if you can find connections? I might add, the other thing that is missing, of course, is the evidence. So the only other thing we would have is the potential to use modern DNA techniques, forensic techniques, to test the evidence. But if you continue to throw out the evidence, what you're doing is you're practicing systemic genocide on cold cases. I can't describe it any way else. So that's Who Killed Theresa for this episode. That's all I got. It's a short episode, but concentrated orange juice. There's a lot packed in there. There's a lot to unpack from that. You might want to just kind of let that digest. If you came in and this is your first listening, you might want to go back and listen because there's a lot here. If I didn't say so before, I'm your host. My name is John Allure. I am the brother of Theresa Lore, who was murdered November 3rd, 1978, and may be possibly connected in these matters. You can listen to us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, etc. Although if you're listening right now, you probably know that. But give us a review. Give us a little love. It boosts up the listenership, and we want people to listen because we want to solve crimes. You can reach me on Twitter. I'm at Justice Guy. That's at JUSTUSGUY. And there's, as always, please check the Theresa Lore website if you want more information on these matters. If you need a textual reference to these things that we discuss in a podcast, that's at theresalore.com. ThereSallore, all one word. I'll post some links to this broadcast that may be of interest to people. I'll certainly post the NFB documentary on Pointe Saint-Charles, The Point, which I think you will enjoy, as well as some links to the Sharon Pryor website that her family has created, amongst some other things. If you want to contact me privately, you can email me at theresalore@gmail.com, TheresaAllore, all one word, at gmail.com. I will entertain your tips, your theories, your requests, anything at all. Nothing is silly until I decide that it's silly. But believe me, if you're sitting on a piece of information or sort of a wingnut theory, don't be too embarrassed. I've heard it all at this point. I'll entertain anything. Okay, so that's it, and I'm going to check out here and enjoy the afternoon because it's a beautiful day where I am. I hope it's a beautiful day where you are. Have a great day.